Ever felt like you're giving everything, yet somehow losing yourself in the process, like you're being pulled in emotional directions you didn't even agree to? If you've ever walked away from a conversation with a woman wondering, how did I end up being the bad guy? Then this is the wake-up call you didn't know you needed. Recognizing emotional baiting and guilt traps is one of the most important steps any man can take to protect his emotional well-being, his self-respect, and his clarity in a relationship. These traps are subtle, psychological techniques used to provoke a reaction, manipulate behavior, and shift control, often without ever saying anything directly harmful or aggressive. What makes emotional baiting so dangerous is that it typically masquerades as love, care, or emotional sensitivity. It doesn't always look like manipulation. In fact, it can feel like you're simply dealing with a person who's emotional or sensitive, but over time, you begin to notice a disturbing pattern. You find yourself constantly defending yourself, proving your love, or over-explaining harmless decisions because the other person seems to twist situations into something they were never intended to be. You realize you're reacting to her mood swings, adjusting your tone before speaking, or preparing for a backlash after doing something as simple as hanging out with a friend or focusing on your goals. These are not random reactions. These are manipulative strategies designed to keep you off balance and keep her in control. A common example of emotional baiting is when a woman intentionally brings up sensitive topics during vulnerable moments just to provoke a response. Let's say you're finally taking a break after a long week, maybe watching a game or reading something you enjoy. Out of nowhere, she hits you with, "I just feel like you don't love me the way you used to." There's no context. Nothing triggered the statement. It's just thrown into the air like a grenade. And now, instead of relaxing, you're spending the next hour explaining yourself, justifying your behavior, and listing all the things you've done for her recently to prove your love. That's not communication. That's emotional baiting. The timing, the vagueness, and the emotional weight of the statement are all intentional. It's not meant to solve anything. It's meant to control your attention and shift your emotional energy toward her. The moment you take the bait, you're no longer centered. You're reacting, apologizing, and trying to fix something that was never clearly broken to begin with. Guilt traps, on the other hand, are a more subtle form of emotional manipulation that work by making you feel morally or emotionally wrong for setting healthy boundaries, making personal decisions, or simply choosing yourself in a moment. For example, suppose you tell her you're going out with your guy friends for a few hours on a weekend. She doesn't object directly, but suddenly becomes distant. She sighs a little too loud, gives half-hearted responses, or says things like, "It's fine, do what you want," in a way that makes it very clear that it's not fine. She may even throw in something like, "I guess I'll just stay here alone like always," or, "It's just weird that you don't want to spend that time with me." Now the situation is flipped. You're the one who's suddenly feeling selfish, guilty, or disloyal for simply trying to enjoy your personal life. Her words may not seem like direct criticism, but the emotional weight of them is enormous. It puts you in a position where you're forced to choose between doing what you want and maintaining the peace, between exercising freedom and avoiding punishment. That is the hallmark of guilt-based manipulation. There's also another advanced form of guilt trapping that looks like vulnerability, but it's actually a setup. A woman may open up about something from her past, a bad relationship, emotional neglect, abandonment. These are real and serious issues, and at first, you feel honored that she trusts you enough to share. But over time, she begins to use that backstory as a way to justify unreasonable behavior. If you forget to call her one night, suddenly it's, "I guess I was right to think no one really cares about me." If you mention needing space, she'll say, "That's what my ex used to say right before he cheated." Now you're not dealing with your current actions. You're being judged by the ghosts of her past. You become her emotional caretaker, responsible for healing wounds you never caused, and any time you fall short of her emotional expectations, she uses that history to make you feel guilty. You didn't fail her. You simply didn't sacrifice your own needs to keep her feelings secure 24/7. That is not your role. That is not your burden. Another sneaky bait is when arguments are created from silence or ambiguity. She may say something like, "You should know what's wrong," or refuse to communicate directly and wait for you to scramble and fix a problem you're not even aware of. This is a form of mental and emotional control. It shifts the power dynamic because now you're trying to read her mind, decode her mood, and figure out how to soothe her, without her ever having to say what she actually feels. It's a setup that keeps you guessing and reacting, rather than thinking clearly and asserting yourself. Ultimately, recognizing emotional baiting and guilt traps requires you to detach from the noise of manipulation and reconnect with your own logic and intuition. If something doesn't make sense but somehow makes you feel guilty, that's your sign. If every disagreement ends with you being the one apologizing, even when you did nothing wrong, that's your sign. If you feel anxious or hesitant to make decisions that serve your growth because of how she might respond, that's your sign. Emotional manipulation thrives in confusion and self-doubt. The moment you begin to see these patterns for what they are, you take the first step toward reclaiming your emotional power. Setting boundaries without apologizing is one of the most powerful forms of self-respect a man can practice. Yet it's also one of the hardest, especially when you're dealing with someone you're emotionally connected to. For many men, the moment they try to assert a limit, whether it's needing time alone, protecting their space, or refusing to accept disrespect, they immediately feel a wave of guilt. That guilt doesn't come from doing something wrong. It comes from being conditioned to believe that standing up for yourself, especially in relationships with women, is somehow rude, mean, or unloving. But here's the reality. Boundaries are not barriers to love. They are the framework within which real love can thrive. A boundary says, "This is how I expect to be treated, and this is how I will treat you in return." If a woman truly respects you, she will respect your boundaries. If she manipulates, resents, or punishes you for them, then you are not being loved, you are being controlled. Boundaries must be clear, firm, and unapologetic. You don't owe anyone an emotional explanation for your need to protect your peace. Let's look at a practical example. Imagine you've had a long, mentally draining day at work. You come home and all you want is an hour to decompress, sit in silence, or maybe focus on your goals. But she immediately starts unloading her complaints from the day or wants your attention in a way that demands emotional energy you just don't have in that moment. Instead of shrinking and forcing yourself to engage just to avoid conflict, setting a boundary would sound like this. "I want to be fully present with you, but right now I need 1 hour to recharge. After that, I'm all yours." You're not being rude. You're not abandoning her. You're simply protecting your energy so that when you do show up, you do it with intention, not resentment. And most importantly, you said it without apologizing or justifying. You stated your need with calm confidence, not guilt. What many men do instead is try to over-explain or soften their boundary until it's no longer a boundary. They say things like, "I'm sorry, I just don't feel like talking right now. Please don't be mad." Or, "I know I should be more available, but I just need a little time. I hope that's okay." These are not boundaries. They are emotional negotiations. The moment you start tiptoeing around your truth, you give the other person the power to question it, push against it, or manipulate it. You teach people how to treat you by how firm and unapologetic you are about your own limits. When you set a boundary and then apologize for it, what you're really doing is asking for permission. And if you're asking for permission to be yourself, you're already operating from a place of weakness, not leadership. Another common scenario where boundaries are crucial is during conflicts or arguments. Say she raises her voice, insults you, or turns a disagreement into personal attacks. Many men try to stay calm, explain themselves, or de-escalate out of fear of being seen as aggressive or toxic. But a boundary in that moment might be something like, I will not continue this conversation if I'm being insulted. I'm here to resolve, not to be attacked. If you want to talk calmly, I'm available. And then you walk away if the disrespect continues. You don't scream. You don't beg her to stop. You don't try to fix her mood. You simply draw a clear line between acceptable and unacceptable behavior, and you enforce it with your action, not emotion. That is power. You also need boundaries around your time, your mission, and your independence. A lot of men lose themselves in relationships because they stop prioritizing their goals or passions out of fear that their woman will feel neglected or unsupported. But if your purpose starts to shrink just to make her feel more secure, then you are abandoning the very core of who you are. A real man leads with purpose and invites his partner to support it, not replace it. You can love her deeply and still say, Saturday mornings are for me, my gym, my reading, my grind. That doesn't change, even in a relationship. Again, no apology, no shame, just clarity. And if she can't respect that, then it's not a healthy connection. It's a contract of emotional sacrifice. Boundaries without apology also extend to what you tolerate emotionally. If she constantly plays the victim, manipulates with silence, or tries to control you through jealousy or insecurity, you have every right to say, I'm not responsible for your feelings, but I will be responsible for how I let them affect me. I can support you, but I won't be controlled by emotional outbursts or games. That's not being cold. That's being grounded. Emotional maturity is the ability to hold space for someone else's feelings without letting them override your own. And any woman who is emotionally mature herself will not only accept your boundaries, she will respect you more for having them. Ultimately, the fear of setting boundaries comes from the fear of rejection. But the deeper truth is that when you don't set boundaries, you reject yourself first. You teach yourself that your peace doesn't matter, your time is negotiable, and your feelings come second. But when you begin to set boundaries without explaining, without softening the blow, and without carrying guilt, you finally start to regain your emotional freedom. You stop operating from a place of fear, and you start leading from a place of self-respect. Understanding the power of detachment is about learning how to stay emotionally grounded, mentally focused, and spiritually balanced in a world that constantly tries to pull you off center, especially in romantic relationships. Too many men make the mistake of confusing emotional detachment with coldness, as if being detached means being numb or heartless. But true detachment isn't about shutting off your feelings. It's about not letting those feelings dictate your self-worth, your identity, or your decisions. Detachment is the ability to be fully present in a relationship while still holding on to who you are outside of it. It's the quiet confidence of knowing that your peace, your purpose, and your happiness don't rely on someone else's behavior, approval, or emotions. And once a man learns to master this mindset, he becomes emotionally unshakable. He becomes the kind of man who isn't reactive, isn't easily manipulated, and isn't constantly shifting his energy just to keep someone else comfortable. That's power. In relationships, detachment becomes especially critical when dealing with emotionally intense or manipulative partners. Imagine you're dating a woman who uses emotional highs and lows to control the dynamic. One day, she's incredibly affectionate, showering you with love and praise. The next day, she's distant, cold, or picking fights over things that seem trivial. A man who hasn't developed detachment will respond to this pattern like a puppet on strings, chasing her approval when she's cold, feeling like a king when she's loving, and constantly trying to decode her moods to avoid being on the wrong side of her emotions. He loses himself in the process. He starts making decisions not based on what's right, but based on what will keep her from pulling away or getting upset. He stops being a man and starts being an emotional hostage. But a man who understands detachment operates differently. He sees the pattern but doesn't fall into it. He doesn't take every mood personally. He doesn't allow himself to get emotionally hijacked. If she's affectionate, he appreciates it. If she pulls away, he doesn't chase or panic. He observes. He stays calm. He maintains his rhythm. That doesn't mean he ignores the relationship or becomes indifferent. It means he responds instead of reacts. Detachment gives him the space to choose his behavior instead of being driven by hers. And this is exactly where emotional power lies, in the ability to pause, reflect, and remain still while others are trying to provoke a storm. Detachment also allows a man to see things clearly, without the fog of emotional desperation. So many men stay in toxic, one-sided relationships because they're emotionally attached to potential rather than reality. They hold on to the early moments, the good days, the compliments, the chemistry, even though everything else is falling apart. And every time the woman gives a little affection, they see it as hope. But hope without reality becomes delusion. Detachment strips away the fantasy and forces you to look at what's really in front of you. Is she consistent? Does she respect your time, your goals, your emotions? Or is she using just enough charm and emotional drama to keep you from walking away while never actually growing with you? Without detachment, you'll keep holding on, thinking that if you just try harder, love more, or fix yourself, things will get better. But with detachment, you realize that love isn't about performance, it's about alignment. Let's say you've told your partner that you're focusing on building your career and you need to stay disciplined with your time. But she constantly interrupts your schedule, gets upset when you don't prioritize her plans, or emotionally withdraws when she doesn't get what she wants. A man without detachment would start compromising his vision just to keep the relationship stable. He'll cancel commitments, reduce his hustle, or alter his mission just to avoid emotional tension. Over time, he begins to resent both himself and her, but feels stuck. A detached man, however, will hold his line with love, not fear. He'll say, "I care about you, but my time is valuable, and I can't compromise that." And if she throws a fit, he doesn't bend. He doesn't explain repeatedly. He doesn't beg her to understand. He lets her react, and then watches how she chooses to respond after the emotion fades. He knows that love built on manipulation isn't love, and no amount of emotional chaos is worth losing himself. Detachment also applies when it's time to walk away. Too many men stay in relationships long after the respect, joy, or alignment is gone because they are emotionally entangled. They fear being alone, they fear starting over, or they fear hurting someone, even when that someone has repeatedly hurt them. Detachment doesn't mean you feel nothing. It means you feel everything, but you choose not to let those feelings trap you in something that isn't serving your growth. It means you can love someone and still say goodbye when the dynamic becomes unhealthy. It means you can miss her and still not go back just because the loneliness hits at night. That is emotional maturity. That is inner strength. Detachment is what frees you from chasing, from overthinking, from trying to force love where it isn't naturally flowing. It's the mindset that says, "I can care deeply, but I will not lose myself in the process." Stop confusing drama for passion. This is a trap many men fall into without even realizing it. They mistake emotional intensity for deep connection. They think the roller coaster of breakups and makeups, the tears, the yelling, the passionate reconciliations are signs of a powerful love, when in reality it's just chaos disguised as chemistry. The truth is, passion that burns too hot and too fast almost always ends in emotional exhaustion. Real passion feels stable, consistent, and deeply rooted in respect and mutual growth, not volatility, manipulation, or emotional explosions. But because many men have been conditioned by movies, music, or even personal trauma to equate dysfunction with intensity, they end up addicted to women who bring more emotional drama than emotional peace. And instead of seeing it as a red flag, they take it as a sign of something real. But real love does not leave you anxious, confused, or constantly recovering from emotional wounds that shouldn't have been inflicted in the first place. Let's look at a common example. You meet a woman who is charismatic, bold, fiery. From day one, the chemistry is off the charts. The conversations are intense, the physical connection feels electric, and there's this adrenaline rush every time you're around her. But soon, that same intensity shows up in conflict. She gets jealous easily. She accuses you of being distant if you don't text back fast enough. She becomes passive-aggressive when you set boundaries. And when you try to create space or express concerns, she flips it on you, gets emotional, or disappears until you come chasing her again. The emotional pendulum swings wildly from hot to cold, but after every argument, there's a dramatic makeup, tears, apologies, intense intimacy, promises to change, and you tell yourself, this is what passion looks like. It's just messy because it's real, but it's not real. It's a toxic loop of tension and relief, and you're mistaking the relief for love. What's really happening is your nervous system is becoming addicted to the adrenaline cycle. The fights, the emotional breakdowns, and the temporary reconnections keep your body in a state of high alert, and it tricks your brain into thinking you're deeply invested. But it's not depth, it's dysfunction. You don't need chaos to feel alive in a relationship. You don't need emotional pain just to feel emotionally connected. And the more you romanticize the drama, the more likely you are to overlook the fact that the foundation is unstable. You might tell yourself, she's just passionate, or she cares deeply. That's why she gets upset. But if someone's passion is constantly costing you peace, it's not love, it's control, insecurity, and emotional immaturity wrapped in a passionate disguise. Drama-based relationships often follow a very specific pattern. They begin fast and intensely. Affection, attention, even declarations of love in the early stages. You feel swept off your feet. She says things like, "I've never felt this way before," or "You just get me." And that emotional high creates a false sense of closeness. But what's really happening is emotional love bombing. It's not built on true understanding, it's built on speed, intensity, and idealization. And once the honeymoon phase ends, the real personality begins to surface. Small disagreements turn into major fights. You feel like you're walking on eggshells, never sure what will set her off next. But then, just when you're ready to leave, she pulls you back in with tears, apologies, or seduction. And because you've equated the highs and lows with passion, you stay. You tell yourself, this is just how we love. We fight hard, but we love hard. That's not passion. That's emotional instability packaged as romance. Real passion doesn't need to destroy your peace. Real passion doesn't play games with your head, punish you with silence, or pull you through cycles of chaos just to prove it's real. In a healthy relationship, passion builds over time through shared values, deep trust, and emotional consistency, not through arguments and recovery. A woman who truly cares for you won't weaponize her emotions to keep you on edge. She won't disappear to make you chase her. She won't stir up jealousy to feel desired. And she definitely won't sabotage your mental health just to feel powerful. Real passion feels safe. It feels calm. It inspires you to become better, not constantly recover from emotional battles that should have never happened. You have to learn to recognize the difference between emotional stimulation and emotional nourishment. One leaves you craving more chaos. The other leaves you growing in peace. Many men don't realize they're stuck in a drama loop until they finally meet a woman who's calm, grounded, and mature. At first, they might think she's boring or too relaxed, simply because there's no chaos to fix, no drama to respond to, no emotional fires to put out. But that's not boredom, that's balance. And the reason it feels unfamiliar is because they've only known love through the lens of dysfunction. Once you reset your understanding of passion, you'll stop chasing what hurts and start choosing what heals. Passion should fuel your life, not drain it. It should elevate your spirit, not fracture your mind. And the sooner you realize that peace is not the absence of passion, it's the evidence of it, the quicker you'll stop confusing drama for something meaningful. Mastering the art of self-validation is one of the most liberating shifts a man can make in his emotional and psychological development. It means learning how to approve of yourself, acknowledge your own worth, and validate your decisions, feelings, and direction in life without constantly seeking permission or praise from others, especially from women. Many men, whether they realize it or not, live their lives in a loop of external validation. They shape their behavior based on how others react to them, particularly the women they're trying to impress, love, or hold on to. They dress a certain way, talk a certain way, make choices that feel safe, just to avoid disapproval or rejection. Over time, their self-worth becomes so entangled in how they're perceived that they lose the ability to stand firmly in who they are, even when no one is clapping. This is dangerous because when your validation comes from outside, it can be taken away. And if someone knows you need their approval to feel good about yourself, they can manipulate you, control you, and keep you constantly chasing a moving target. Imagine a man who gets into a relationship with a woman who's emotionally unpredictable. When she's happy with him, he feels like a king. He walks taller, he's more confident, he feels secure. But the moment she gets distant, criticizes him, or compares him to others, he crumbles. He starts questioning his actions, apologizing for things he didn't do, and bending over backward just to get back in her good graces. He's not really trying to fix the relationship. He's trying to fix how he feels about himself, and he's using her emotional approval as the measuring stick. That's what happens when a man doesn't know how to self-validate. He becomes emotionally dependent, even if he pretends to be independent. He might be financially successful or socially confident, but emotionally, he's still seeking permission to feel worthy. Self-validation means you know your worth, whether someone else acknowledges it or not. It means you understand your strengths, your values, and your purpose so deeply that external opinions don't shake your foundation. When you validate yourself, you no longer need a woman to constantly reassure you that you're good enough, man enough, or lovable. Of course, we all appreciate love, support, and encouragement, but when your emotional stability depends on it, you're handing over the keys to your sense of self. And anyone who knows that can drive you in whatever direction they choose. A man who self-validates can still be in a loving relationship, but he won't compromise his principles just to keep the peace. He won't become submissive to emotional pressure, and he definitely won't be controlled by silent treatments, guilt trips, or emotional blackmail. Let's say you're in a relationship where your woman constantly tests you. Maybe she flirts with other guys to see how jealous you get, or she compares you to her exes to stir insecurity. If you don't have strong self-validation, you'll likely become defensive, insecure, or overly reactive. You might start checking her phone, overanalyzing her words, or trying to prove you're better than whoever she mentions. You'll spiral into emotional chaos, trying to win a game that was never meant to be fair. But if you've mastered self-validation, your response will be rooted in calm power. You'll think, I know who I am and I'm not competing with anyone. If you need to play games to feel desired, you're not for me. That kind of unshakable confidence is only possible when you no longer need her reactions to define your value. Self-validation also changes how you handle failure or rejection. A man who validates himself doesn't crumble when a woman isn't interested, doesn't ghost or ends things. He doesn't see it as a reflection of his inadequacy. He sees it as a natural outcome of incompatible energy. He doesn't spiral into self-doubt or bitterness. He knows that rejection isn't always personal, it's directional, and when your self-worth isn't built on external acceptance, you become far more resilient. You don't beg, you don't chase, you don't perform for love. You simply show up as yourself, fully, and let people choose you for who you really are, not for the version of yourself you contort into for their approval. Mastering self-validation also means you learn to listen to your own voice above the noise. Instead of asking, will she like this? Or what will people think? You ask, Does this feel right to me? Is this in alignment with my values? That's where your compass comes from. It's internal. It doesn't shift based on mood, attraction, or other people's opinions. And when you live from that place, you gain not only peace, but power. You stop living reactively and start living intentionally. You start attracting people who respect your presence rather than taking advantage of your need for approval. Women respect men who know who they are, not men who constantly ask them who they should be. When you become the source of your own validation, you no longer need to be chosen. You choose. You no longer seek approval. You offer it to yourself. And in that space, you find freedom, not just from manipulation, but from the emotional dependence that makes manipulation possible. Knowing when to walk away is one of the most critical emotional skills a man can develop, not just in relationships, but in life. It requires clarity, courage, and a deep understanding of your own value. Too many men stay in relationships far longer than they should, not because the connection is healthy or fulfilling, but because they're afraid. They fear being alone. They fear starting over. They fear that if they leave, they'll never find someone else. But staying in a situation that slowly erodes your self-worth, drains your energy, or makes you question your identity is far more dangerous than walking away will ever be. Walking away doesn't mean you didn't love deeply. It doesn't mean you failed. It means you recognize that love without respect, without growth, without peace, is not a love worth holding on to. It means you refuse to keep sacrificing your potential for temporary emotional comfort. A man who knows when to walk away is a man who knows how to protect his soul from slow destruction masked as commitment. There's a common situation many men find themselves in. They meet a woman who seems perfect in the beginning. She's attentive, exciting, affectionate, and says all the right things. The relationship moves fast, and the emotional connection feels deep. But as time goes on, the red flags begin to show. She becomes critical, moody, manipulative, or emotionally volatile. She apologizes when you pull back, promises to change, and showers you with affection when you threaten to leave. The cycle continues. Highs followed by lows, connection followed by confusion. You keep thinking back to how things used to be and convince yourself that maybe, just maybe, it can get back to that again. You start taking on the emotional labor of holding everything together. You stay quiet to avoid arguments. You suppress your needs to maintain peace. You start losing parts of yourself just to keep her happy. And the worst part is, you begin to believe this is normal, that this is what relationships are supposed to feel like. But deep down, there's a voice inside you whispering that something is off, that this isn't love, it's survival. And that voice, if you're honest enough to hear it, is telling you it's time to walk away. Walking away isn't always about abuse or extreme toxicity. Sometimes it's just about misalignment. You might be with someone who doesn't respect your time, who doesn't support your vision, who belittles your dreams, or constantly tests your emotional limits. You might be with someone who doesn't bring out the best in you, who triggers your insecurities more than your confidence, who thrives on drama rather than peace. And yet, because there's history or moments of affection, or even just familiarity, you stay. You try to fix, to explain, to adapt. You think that if you just love harder, communicate better, or become more of what she wants, she'll finally change. But love isn't supposed to feel like a performance. And the moment you find yourself constantly justifying your presence in someone's life, it's time to step back and evaluate what you're really holding on to. Because the truth is, when someone truly values you, you won't have to fight so hard to be seen, heard, and respected. Another mistake men make is waiting for the perfect moment to walk away. They wait for one last big argument, one final disrespect, one more moment of clarity to confirm what they already know. But sometimes, the best time to walk away is in the quiet, when things aren't exploding but slowly eroding, when the relationship doesn't feel toxic enough to leave, but not healthy enough to stay. That's where the real test lies. Do you have the strength to leave not because you're being pushed out, but because you're finally choosing yourself? Because you've realized that peace isn't a privilege, it's a necessity? That you weren't made to shrink, to tiptoe, to constantly prove your worth to someone who should already see it? There's a version of you that exists on the other side of walking away. He's stronger, clearer, and more aligned with his purpose. But you can't become him while you're still stuck in emotional limbo. You can't rise while you're tethered to a situation that keeps dragging you down. And yes, walking away will hurt. You will grieve. You will question yourself. You will have lonely nights and moments of weakness where you consider going back. But pain is not the same as regret. Regret is what happens when you stay too long, when you ignore your gut, when you betray yourself just to be chosen by someone else. You can love someone and still realize that they're not meant to walk the entire journey with you. You can cherish the good memories without letting them trap you in a cycle that no longer serves you. And when you finally walk away, not out of anger, but out of deep, unshakable clarity, that's when you reclaim your power, your peace, and your freedom. Gentlemen, the truth is simple but often hard to accept. No one can manipulate you unless you allow it. The power to set the tone in your life, in your relationships, and in how you're treated doesn't lie in her hands. It lies in yours. This isn't about blaming women. This is about building men. Men who are emotionally intelligent, self-aware, and strong enough to lead with clarity instead of confusion. You don't need to fight for approval, chase affection, or keep proving your worth. You need to stand firm in who you are. The moment you start recognizing emotional baiting for what it is, setting unapologetic boundaries, detaching from unnecessary drama, and choosing peace over chaos, you rise. When you stop mistaking emotional games for genuine love, when you learn to validate yourself without begging for anyone's praise, when you finally walk away from situations that drain your soul instead of feed your growth, you don't just stop being manipulated, you become unshakable. You become the man who can't be played, controlled, or molded by anyone's emotional pressure. The version of you that refuses to settle, that holds the line, that lives with intention instead of reaction. That's the man every high-value woman respects, every manipulative woman fears, and most importantly, the man you were always meant to be. Stay rooted, stay aware, stay in control, not just of the relationship, but of yourself. Because once you master that, no one ever gets to pull your strings again.